He said I'd never be anything. But tonight, his empire wears my name. Rain slid down the limousine window like liquid glass. The flashes outside were blinding, a storm of cameras, champagne, and curiosity. Inside, silence felt heavier than diamonds. My reflection in the tinted glass looked calm, but my heart whispered otherwise. It remembered the nights when silence meant loneliness, not power. The car stopped before the grand entrance. Gold lights, red carpet, marble stairs that smelled like old money and arrogance. I touched the diamond bracelet on my wrist, the same one he once called cheap. Now it carried my signature, engraved in gold. Everyone called this night a celebration. I called it a quiet revenge. The door opened. Flashbulbs exploded. For a moment, I froze. Not because of fear, but because I'd finally arrived at the world he said I'd never belong to. They used to laugh when I dreamed too loud. They said ambition didn't suit a woman like me, poor, invisible, inconvenient. But pain has a strange talent. It teaches you the language of silence. I remember his words the day he left. "You'll never be anything," he said, buttoning his designer shirt like it was armor. "You don't belong in my world." He walked away, leaving me with a wilted rose and an unpaid rent. I didn't cry, not then. The tears came later when silence became the only friend left. But that night, I made a promise. If the world wouldn't open its doors, I'd build my own palace. Years later, that promise had a name, Lyra Diamonds, a brand whispered by every woman who ever loved and lost. They wore my jewels not just for beauty, but for reminder that silence can be sharper than revenge. I leaned back in the limousine. My assistant's voice broke the hush. "Are you ready, Ms. Lyra?" My name, Lyra Vale, wasn't the one he knew. He'd remember another girl, another version of me, barefoot, naive, believing that love could save us from class and cruelty. Tonight that ghost would walk beside me and disappear under the chandeliers. The gala was his kingdom, a glass palace built on inherited pride. But my designs glittered everywhere. The invitations, the stage, even the centerpiece of the auction carried my logo. He had no idea, not yet. As I stepped out, rain kissed the marble, leaving silver trails at my feet. The cameras roared. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Lyra Vale, the designer everyone's talking about." Somewhere beyond the lights, I felt his gaze. Even before I saw him, he stood at the top of the stairs, tuxedo, arrogance, charm. The same man who once told me I was too simple for his world. And yet, when his eyes met mine, I saw the first crack in his perfect facade. Recognition, shock, regret, all hidden behind a practiced smile. He raised a glass toward me. "Welcome," he mouthed, as if he'd invited me. But fate had sent the invitation long before he did. The press moved closer, shouting questions. "Lyra, is it true your next collection is inspired by heartbreak?" I smiled softly. Heartbreak teaches precision. Flash. Laughter. Another question. Behind the laughter, I caught a glimpse of his fiancée. Flawless, glittering, unaware that the bracelet on her wrist bore my initials. The world was spinning exactly as I'd designed it, but even diamonds have memory. And tonight, mine wanted closure. Inside, violins whispered through the air. Gold light spilled across crystal walls. Every step I took echoed like a heartbeat. I passed portraits of founders, patrons, and ghosts of wealth. None of them smiled. Perhaps they too knew that luxury is just loneliness dressed in silk. A server approached, offering champagne. I took it. Not to drink, but to hold. Something steady, fragile, temporary, like promises. The first time he gave me champagne, it was in a cheap hotel room. He said dreams tasted better in crystal glasses. But he drank from mine. He always did. I looked across the room and found him again, laughing, performing, shining. But every light on him only made his shadow longer. He didn't know yet, that the company sponsoring his empire tonight was mine. As the speeches began, my bracelet caught the spotlight. The reflection painted the walls in silver fire. And for a moment, I thought of the girl who once sketched jewels on napkins, believing one day she'd be seen. She had been broken, but she had also been reborn. Because pain is the most patient sculptor, and silence the best accomplice. When the host announced my name, the crowd turned. Tonight, we welcome the visionary behind Lyra Diamonds. He turned too. The glass in his hand trembled, and I smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Sometimes revenge doesn't need thunder. It just needs presence. I stepped toward the stage, the sound of heels like soft thunder on marble. Every flash of light was a heartbeat, every whisper an echo of what he once said. He thought he'd broken me, but I'd simply become quieter, and far more dangerous. The girl he once dismissed as nothing had become the silence his world now revolved around. Sometimes stories like this aren't just fiction. They're echoes of every woman who was once told she wasn't enough. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself in silence, you'll understand what comes next. And when you do, tell me where you're listening from. Because whispered stories like these connect us more than love, more than loss. They remind us we were never truly alone. The envelope arrived wrapped in silver ribbon, heavy like guilt. No sender's name, only gold letters that spelled my past. The moment I touched it, I knew whose hands had sealed it. Inside, an invitation. Gala at the Meridian Isle Resort, the same island where he once promised forever. Now he would celebrate his engagement with another. For a long time I stared at the embossed initials, not his, mine, because his event carried the logo of Lyra Diamonds. I laughed softly. Fate has exquisite taste in irony. That night, I opened a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for peace. The city glowed outside my window, steel, glass, and quiet ambition. I traced the bracelet on my wrist and whispered, "Let him see what he called nothing." Memories flooded like perfume spilled on silk. The first time we met, he was the storm I mistook for shelter. He talked about power as if it were love, and I believed him because I wanted to believe in something. I remembered his apartment, the scent of cedar and arrogance. He had the habit of saying my world instead of our world. Maybe that was the warning I ignored. The invitation lay open on my desk, breathing temptation. "Attend the gala," it said. "Face the man who burned you, the ghosts who watched." But my heart answered differently. "Walk in wearing silence like perfume." The next morning I called my assistant. "Book 2 tickets to Meridian Isle." She hesitated. "Business or personal?" "Both," I said. "One to end, one to begin." As the jet sliced through clouds, I watched the ocean glitter below, the same color as the dreams I used to drown in. I thought about the girl who once waited for him at train stations, believing success meant being chosen. Now I knew better. Power isn't taken, it's remembered. It was always mine. I'd just forgotten the language. Landing on the island felt like stepping into another version of time. Palm trees whispered secrets to the wind. Every sound carried luxury's accent. But beneath it all, I sensed history waiting for an encore. At the villa, white curtains swayed like ghosts of dresses I'd never wear again. I stood before the mirror, silk gown, bare shoulders, quiet defiance. He would recognize the eyes, maybe, but not the woman behind them. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in salt air and violin notes. Guests descended from yachts and private jets, men smelling of money, women armored in diamonds. My diamonds. Every flash of light outside belonged to me, though they didn't know it. I walked past photographers who whispered, "She's the mystery designer, the one who never speaks on camera." If only they knew how silence was forged. From the balcony above, I saw him greeting guests, his smile rehearsed, his arm around perfection. The fiancé glowed, every inch the fairy tale I once thought I wanted. But something in his posture betrayed him. A stiffness, a search, a ghost in his crowd. He felt me before he saw me. Some bonds never truly break. They just change temperature. When his gaze found mine, the room inhaled and forgot to exhale. He excused himself from his circle and walked toward me. The air thickened with unspoken years. "Lyra Vale," he said, tasting the name as if it hurt. I heard the sponsor was mysterious. I should have guessed. "You never were good at guessing," I replied. His laugh was thin. "You look different." "No," I said. "You're finally seeing clearly." A photographer captured the moment. The ex who said I'd be nothing, standing in the glow of the woman who became everything. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" I took it, not out of forgiveness, but choreography. The crowd watched as we descended the marble steps together. To them it looked like reunion. To me, it was closure rehearsing its lines. The orchestra swelled. I leaned close enough for him to hear what only truth could whisper. "Careful," I said. "Diamonds remember pressure." He froze. I smiled. The night stretched ahead, shimmering, dangerous. Every glass of champagne, every whisper of silk, was part of the stage I'd built years ago. And though the curtain had only just risen, I already knew the ending. Because some invitations are not to parties, they're to reckonings. They say memory fades with time, but some words never age. They echo. His voice still lived somewhere between my ribs and my heartbeat. "You'll never be anything, Lyra. Dreams don't pay rent. Wake up before the world laughs at you." Back then, I thought he was saving me from failure. Now I know he was only saving himself from my potential. We lived in a small apartment above a cafe that smelled of burnt coffee and missed chances. He'd come home late, talking about meetings, investments, people who mattered. I'd listen, believing one day I'd be one of them. But he never saw me as a partner, just a reflection of what he wanted to control. When I spoke about design, his smile froze. He'd say, "Pretty things don't make power, Lyra. Men do." And every time, a piece of me went silent. One night, I showed him my first sketch, a ring shaped like a teardrop caught in light. He looked at it for a moment, then said, "You're wasting your time. No one buys poetry." I pretended not to care, but when he left the room, I tore the page. Not out of anger, out of fear that he was right. I remember the last morning we shared. The rain was soft, forgiving. He packed his bags with precision, the way men do when they've already left emotionally. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Somewhere I can breathe," he said. "As long as you stay in this world of dreams, I'll always be drowning." I wanted to scream, "Then drown with me." But pride is quieter than pain. He walked out, leaving his cologne behind, a scent that haunted every fabric I owned. For weeks I couldn't draw, I couldn't eat. I'd sit by the window watching city lights blink like broken promises. People say heartbreak kills appetite. It doesn't. It just replaces hunger with emptiness. I started working nights at the cafe downstairs, pouring coffee for strangers who never looked up. But I liked that. Being unseen felt safe. One evening, an old woman left behind a diamond bracelet. It was chipped, almost worthless. I stared at it under the light, and something in me stirred. Beauty in imperfection. That's where I belonged. I fixed it using wire and hope. When I finished, it looked alive again. For the first time since he left, I smiled. That night, I drew another design. A bracelet that could carry memories like veins of light. It wasn't art, it was resurrection. Days blurred into weeks. The landlord knocked. Bills piled like insults. But I kept sketching. When survival becomes habit, creation becomes rebellion. Then one night, a stranger sat at the cafe counter. He watched me clean tables, my hair tied, my soul half asleep. "You're Lyra Vale, right?" he asked. I froze. No one used my full name anymore. He introduced himself as Adrian Kale. "I saw the bracelet you repaired for Mrs. Sloane," he said. "She wouldn't stop talking about it. I'd like to commission you." Commission. Such a small word. Such a large door. He gave me his card, black, embossed, intimidating. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I met him at a studio overlooking the river. He offered me space, tools, and something rarer, belief. "I invest in potential others overlook," he said. "Show me what silence has taught you." And I did. Weeks later, my designs filled the glass cases of boutiques. People didn't know my name yet, but they whispered about the woman who turned scars into luxury. He, my ex, must have seen the headlines. He never called. But silence carries its own applause. Sometimes before sleep, I'd imagine running into him again. Would he recognize me? Would he see the woman he buried under words like nothing and too much? The fantasy always ended the same way. I'd smile, not with arrogance, but peace. Because revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about proving you were never broken. Years passed like silk through fingers. The pain softened but never disappeared. It became the heartbeat of every jewel I created. The world called me the silent designer, and I like that, because silence had been my prison. Now it was my crown. Still, some nights, when the city slept, I'd look at the stars and wonder if he ever felt small beneath them, if he ever thought of the woman he'd left behind. But then I'd remember. He gave me his words as prophecy, and I turned them into purpose. He said I'd never be anything, and he was right, for a while, until I became everything he couldn't afford. Some stories end with goodbye. Mine began with it. The night he left, I thought silence would swallow me whole. But silence became my teacher. It taught me how to listen, not to others, but to the voice I'd buried under his shadow. That voice said, "Create," even when no one is watching. The city outside my apartment was cruel and beautiful. Billboards glowed with faces that looked nothing like mine. But every light was a challenge. Every window, a reminder that even diamonds are born in darkness. I started sketching again, on receipts, napkins, anything that would hold a line. Shapes flowed like confessions. Rings that looked like promises kept. Necklaces shaped like resilience. There was no plan. Only instinct, and the ache to prove that beauty could be born from pain. Adrian Cale became both investor and ghost. He appeared rarely, always dressed in shadows and quiet questions. He never asked about my past, and I never offered it. Some wounds don't need words, they need creation. "Your designs speak," he once said, tracing the curve of a ring I'd made. "They whisper survival." I smiled. Then I found my language. Months passed. My studio grew, but my circle didn't. I kept my world small. Sketches, solder, metal, and memory. At night, I'd fall asleep at my workbench, my fingers stained with silver dust. Sometimes, I'd dream of him. Not as he was, but as he might have been, if pride hadn't eaten his heart. Each morning, I'd wake before sunrise and open the window. The air smelled of rain and renewal, and I'd whisper to the horizon, "I'm still here." The first piece I sold wasn't grand, a pendant shaped like a tear frozen in gold. A journalist saw it at a boutique and wrote, "This design carries silence like a melody." Overnight, the orders multiplied, and so did my fear. Success doesn't erase pain, it exposes it under brighter light. Every achievement echoed his words, "You'll never be anything." So I worked harder. Until one day, I realized I wasn't running from his voice anymore. I was running toward mine. Adrian called me into his office one evening. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. "Lyra," he said, "it's time people know your name." I shook my head. "Names carry ghosts." He smiled. "Then give them a new one." And that's how Lyra Diamonds was born. A brand with no face, no past, only light. He handled the business. I handled the soul. The world didn't know who designed those pieces, but they felt something every time they wore one. Freedom, power, redemption. We launched the first collection at a private showing. Only 50 guests, 50 hearts capable of influencing millions. The theme, resurrection. Each piece had a story, carved into gold, breathed through light. When the lights dimmed and the curtains fell, there was a moment of silence so pure it felt sacred. Then came the applause. It wasn't loud, it was reverent, like they'd witnessed something fragile being reborn. Afterward, Adrian approached me. "You did it," he said. "No," I whispered. "She did." He looked puzzled. "The woman who believed she was nothing," I explained. "She did this. I just gave her a voice." The months that followed felt unreal. Lyra diamonds spread across continents, worn by queens, actresses, and women who'd survived storms of their own. They didn't know my story, but they wore pieces of it around their necks. Each sale, each photograph, was a quiet rebellion against every word that once broke me. But success has its own kind of loneliness. The higher I climbed, the fewer voices I trusted. Some nights I'd turn off the lights in my penthouse and just sit in the dark, listening to the hum of the city, wondering if he ever looked up and saw my name glowing on billboards. One morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a single white rose, the same kind he once left behind when he walked out. Attached, a note. "I saw your work. You've become quite something." No signature, but I knew. The ink smelled like arrogance. I placed the rose in a crystal vase. Then slowly I took off my bracelet, the one he'd given me years ago, and laid it beside it. "This," I whispered, "is the last funeral I'll attend." That night, I melted the bracelet down. Gold turned liquid under flame, its past burning away in silence. From its ashes, I crafted something new, a thin, flawless bangle with a single diamond at its heart. The next day, it became the signature piece of my next collection, the Phoenix line. It sold out in hours, but more than that, it freed me, because sometimes the only way to bury the past is to wear it differently. The rebirth wasn't loud. It wasn't a grand moment. It was a whisper between breaths, a knowing that I'd crossed an invisible line between who I was and who I became. And yet, even in triumph, one truth lingered like perfume. He had to see it. He had to know. Not for revenge, but because closure wears better under chandeliers. They called it a meeting, but it felt like destiny arriving in heels. The conference room shimmered, glass walls, marble floors, and a skyline painted in gold. Adrian stood by the window, speaking with men who wore confidence like cologne. When he saw me, he nodded. "Lyra," he said, "it's time to sign your future." The papers on the table looked innocent. Contracts always do. But I knew. These words could turn a whisper into an empire. One of the executives smiled politely. "Lyra Diamonds will partner with the Carvel Group," he said. "They'll handle global distribution. You handle design." I studied the logo embossed on the folder, a symbol of wealth that once belonged to his world. Carvel, his family name. The universe has a wicked sense of humor. I leaned back, hiding my heartbeat behind composure. "Carvel Group?" I asked softly. "Yes," Adrian confirmed. "They approached us directly. They want your signature on the collection." My signature, the name he never believed in. Now it was the one his empire wanted. I smiled. "Let's make it official." As I pressed the pen to paper, I felt every wound turn into ink, every insult, every tear, now carved into a global contract. After the meeting, Adrian poured champagne. "To beginnings," he said. I lifted my glass. "To endings that look like them." He tilted his head. "You always talk in riddles." "Only because truth sounds better that way," I replied. He smiled, but his eyes searched mine. He didn't know my past, but he felt it, like the echo of thunder after lightning. Within months, the deal made headlines. Lyra Diamonds partners with Carvel Group, a new era of luxury. My designs filled magazines, runways, red carpets. Every piece carried the story of a woman they didn't know, and a silence they could feel. The bracelet from the Phoenix line became the centerpiece of the collection. They called it the Rain. The world saw beauty. I saw irony. I built my headquarters overlooking the ocean. The walls were white. The air smelled of salt and freedom. No photos, no past, only light and work. Sometimes I'd walk the corridors at night, listening to the soft hum of machines carving diamonds. Each spark reminded me of the fire I once swallowed to survive. And when exhaustion whispered doubt, I'd look at my reflection in the glass and say, "You were right to stay quiet," until silence became currency. The Carvel executives wanted a launch event, grand, cinematic, televised, a gala where the elite would gather to celebrate wealth disguised as art. And though my name would headline the night, I preferred to remain unseen. Mystery sells better than beauty, and anonymity is the last luxury left. Still, Adrian insisted. They need to see the woman behind the legend, he said. Otherwise they'll invent her. He didn't know they already had. The press began speculating. Who is Lyra Vale? Why does she hide her face? Rumors danced. Some said I was royalty, others said I was a ghost. Both were partly true, because to become powerful I had to die to who I was. One afternoon, Adrian entered my studio holding a velvet box. Inside lay a bracelet, mine. But newer, flawless, reborn. I had it remade, he said. Your story deserves a symbol. I ran my fingers over the diamond's edge. It gleamed like forgiveness I hadn't learned yet. He looked at me quietly. Whatever this piece means to you, wear it when you're ready. That night, I placed the bracelet on my wrist. It felt cold at first, like a stranger's touch. But slowly it warmed, as if remembering who I'd been. I stood before the mirror, watching moonlight scatter across the gems. The woman staring back wasn't built by love. She was built by silence, survival, and the art of staying unseen. I whispered, let him see what he couldn't hold. And I knew then, I'd attend the gala, not as a guest, as the ghost of everything he lost. The next morning, Adrian confirmed the details. Meridian Isle Resort, 2 months from now, he said. I froze, pretending to sip my coffee. That name, Meridian Isle, hit like déjà vu in high heels. The same place where he proposed years ago. The same place he left me. Fate, again, arranging its stage. Lyra? Adrian asked, noticing my silence. Fine, I said, smiling faintly. Let the gala be at Meridian. He nodded, unaware of the storm those words had unleashed. When he left, I turned toward the window. The city reflected like liquid diamonds below, and I whispered to my reflection, You wanted me to wake up, didn't you? Well, I did. From that day, I worked relentlessly. Every design, every stone set into gold, carried a message only I understood. He'd see it all. The invitations, the logo, the collection, each one a love letter written in Revenge's handwriting. I wasn't coming back to him. I was coming back to the truth, that he never made me small. I just outgrew the cage he built. The island hadn't changed, only I had. From the plane window, Meridian Isle looked like a memory suspended in blue glass. Perfect, polished, merciless. I remembered every corner of that place, the cliffs, the old chapel, the scent of salt and jasmine that once carried his name. Now it carried mine. As the jet descended, I whispered to the sea, I'm not here to remember. I'm here to reclaim. The gala was already being built. Marble arches, chandeliers shipped from Vienna, and a stage shaped like a diamond's edge. Everything shimmered with the arrogance of money. And yet, I smiled. Because all of it, every beam of light, every invitation, carried the mark of Lyra diamonds. He didn't know it yet. The empire that hosted his celebration was mine. When I arrived at my private villa, the air felt thick with nostalgia. The staff greeted me with rehearsed smiles. I dismissed them gently. I needed silence. I walked through the rooms. White walls, glass doors, the same view of the ocean that once witnessed our love's collapse. Back then, I was a guest. Now I owned the view. I set my suitcase on the marble floor and opened the balcony doors. Wind rushed in, heavy with ghosts. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. It didn't hurt anymore. It just hummed. That evening, I prepared alone. No stylists, no cameras, just me, a mirror, and the sound of the sea whispering old promises. My gown was midnight silk. My makeup, minimal, luminous. Power doesn't shout, it breathes. I reached for the bracelet, the one reborn from ashes, and clasped it around my wrist. Its cool weight reminded me who I'd become. For a long moment, I looked at my reflection. The same face, the same eyes, but a different soul behind them. The night air was electric. Black cars lined the road to the resort. Paparazzi lights flashed like lightning storms. The whispers began before I even stepped out. Is that her? The designer? She never attends events. She's even more mysterious in person. Each word was a symphony of curiosity, and I, the composer, in silence. When I entered the grand hall, the world paused. Music softened. Heads turned. For a heartbeat, all that existed was my footsteps, deliberate, soft, final. Gold chandeliers floated above like constellations. I could smell money in the air, perfume, champagne, expectation. And then him, standing by the central staircase, laughing, surrounded by people who worshipped his charm. He hadn't aged much, still perfect, still polished. But perfection is brittle. He looked up and saw me. The laughter died in his throat. His glass tilted slightly. Recognition bloomed like shock in slow motion. He whispered something to his fiancée and excused himself. The crowd parted as he walked toward me, and suddenly, the air between us was alive with ghosts. "Lyra," he said, his voice quieter than the music. "I didn't expect—" "No," I interrupted. "You never did." He hesitated, eyes scanning my face like a photograph from another life. "You look different." "I am." We stood in silence. The orchestra swelled, violins filling the spaces where words once lived. He looked around, then leaned closer. "So, this is your empire?" "It's everyone's," I said softly. "But tonight, it's mine." He laughed, trying to recover his composure. "Still dramatic, I see." I smiled. "Still predictable." A photographer approached, asking for a picture. He placed a hand lightly on my back. I didn't move away. Power can wear civility like silk. The flash went off, freezing us in a frame that would later circle magazines. The X and the enigma. The irony tasted like champagne. As the night unfolded, I floated through conversations, laughter, and clinking glasses. He followed me with his eyes. Every time I turned, he looked away a second too late. At one point, his fiancée approached me. "You're Lyra Vale," she said brightly. "I've always admired your work. I even wore your bracelet to our engagement shoot." I glanced at it. My design, delicate, precise, ironic. "That one?" I asked. "Yes, it's called The Rain. Do you know the story behind it?" I smiled, intimately. Later, I stepped out onto the terrace for air. The sea glittered in the distance, calm and cruel. Behind me, the music softened. Jazz melting into memory. He followed me, of course. He always did when silence became uncomfortable. "You came all this way," he said. "To watch you?" I turned, meeting his gaze. "No, to watch myself, not care." He flinched. "Lyra, I forgive you," I said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I need the space back." He looked away, jaw tense. "You've changed." "I had to," I said. "You told me I'd never be anything. I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized how wrong you were." He exhaled slowly. "And now?" "Now," I whispered. "I'm just here for the view." The wind shifted. The bracelet on my wrist caught the moonlight, scattering it across his suit like diamonds, or ghosts. He looked at it, eyes narrowing. "That bracelet, I've seen it before." "Yes, I said. You have. Inside, the host called for a toast. I turned away. I should go, I said. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Careful, I whispered. Diamonds cut. Then I walked away, heels clicking against marble, the sound of closure wrapped in elegance. Behind me, the orchestra swelled, and the island, the one that once broke me, now echoed my return in perfect harmony. He found me again before the night ended. Of course he did. Men like him can't resist trying to reopen doors they slammed shut. The ballroom was emptying, laughter fading, heels clicking toward waiting limousines. Only the scent of champagne and regret remained. I stood by the balcony watching the ocean melt into darkness. He approached quietly, like temptation wearing a suit. Still avoiding me? He asked. I'm not avoiding, I said softly. I'm choosing peace. He chuckled, but the sound cracked. Peace looks expensive on you. It cost everything, I replied. He leaned against the railing beside me, close enough for the air to tremble. The same cologne, the same voice, different woman. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Tell you what? That Lyra Diamonds was you. I turned to him slowly. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer, and that silence said more than confession ever could. For a moment, the only sound was the sea breathing against the rocks. He stared at my bracelet, the one born from the ashes of his gift. I remember that design, he said quietly. No, I whispered. You remember the mistake. His brow furrowed. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Enjoying? I smiled faintly. No, I'm surviving beautifully. He reached for my glass of champagne, his fingers brushing mine. The contact was electric, not passion, but memory colliding with consequence. You always did know how to make an entrance, he said, and you always did underestimate exits. He laughed softly this time. You've changed. I evolved, I said. There's a difference. He studied my face, searching for the softness he once manipulated. It wasn't there. I thought about you, he said finally. Sometimes I'd see a woman wearing your designs and wonder, what? If you forgave me. I looked at him, the man who once told me I'd never be anything, and for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the villain or the love, but as a lesson. I didn't need forgiveness, I said. I needed distance. He stepped closer. Lyra, he murmured. I was young, stupid, afraid. Afraid of what? I asked. Of what you'd become. The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. He wasn't lying. Fear had driven him more than cruelty ever did. But knowing the truth didn't heal anything. It just made the wound glow under softer light. He sighed, glancing at the empty room behind us. I built everything to prove I was right, he admitted. But it's all hollow. Every party, every deal, empty. And now? I asked. Now I see you, and it feels like karma has taste. I smiled. Sweet or bitter? He exhaled. Both. A waiter appeared with a tray offering refills. I declined. He took one. Anything to delay the silence between us. The moon reflected off the ocean, silver waves licking the edge of the terrace. He followed my gaze. You still find beauty in broken things, he said. That's why I ever loved you, I replied. He turned sharply. Ever? Yes, past tense. He laughed almost bitterly. You've become cold. No, I said, I've become calm. He studied me. The gown, the diamonds, the serenity he could never afford. You look untouchable, he whispered. That's because you already touched too much. For a second, his facade cracked. All the power, the wealth, the arrogance, gone. What remained was a man who'd realized he lost more than love. He lost his witness. He set down his glass and leaned in. Tell me, Lyra, what do you want? I smiled, to never want anything from you again. He blinked, speechless. I took a step closer, my perfume filling the space between us. "But if you insist on giving me something," I said softly, "give me silence. You owe me that much." He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as I walked past him, back into the hall. The chandeliers flickered above, their crystals trembling as if the night itself held its breath. I stopped at the door and looked back once. He stood alone, bathed in moonlight, smaller somehow. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped fighting. As I left the ballroom, I felt the weight lift. The island that once caged me now bowed in quiet reverence. Outside, the rain began, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. I raised my face to it and smiled. Tears and rain had always looked the same, but this time, I knew the difference. One came from sorrow, the other from release. Back in my villa, I removed the bracelet and placed it on the table. For the first time, it looked lighter, as if it too was ready to rest. I whispered to the night. He said I'd never be anything. Then I smiled to myself. But tonight, I was everything. And somewhere on the other side of the island, a man stared into the ocean, haunted by the silence of the woman who no longer needed to speak. The morning after the gala felt heavier than any hangover. The island woke under gray skies, as if even the sun had chosen discretion. I sat on the terrace of my villa, barefoot, robe loose, coffee untouched. Across the bay, the resort shimmered with aftermath. He was still there, somewhere inside those glass walls, learning that some losses echo louder than victories. The world saw a successful night. He saw a mirror. My assistant brought the morning papers. Every headline carried our photo, the X and the Empire. Reunion of the decade, one read. Another, the man who inspired a billion-dollar brand. I almost laughed. He inspired nothing. He provoked everything. The press called it poetic. They didn't know how right they were. A message arrived mid-morning. No sender, just words. Can we talk? One last time. I stared at it for a long while, then typed a single reply. At noon. The pier. When I arrived, the sky had shifted from silver to storm. He stood waiting, no entourage, no fiancé. Just a man stripped of everything that once protected him. "Lyra," he said, voice rough, "thank you for coming." "I didn't," I answered. "I just arrived." For a moment we said nothing. The sea crashed against the rocks below, loud enough to swallow every excuse. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep cures, but the kind that comes from realizing you can't undo your own story. "I shouldn't have left," he said finally. "No," I replied. "You should have stayed and still lost me. That would have been harder." He winced. Truth has no mercy when spoken without anger. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A letter, creased and fragile. "I kept this," he said. "Your sketch, the first ring you ever drew." I blinked, caught between disbelief and déjà vu. He unfolded the paper carefully, like handling a relic. "I told you it would never sell," he said softly. I was wrong. The ring on that page, the teardrop caught in light, was now the centerpiece of the Lyra Diamond's legacy. "You built something immortal," he said. "I built something inevitable," I corrected. "Immortality belongs to myths. I deal in truth." He smiled weakly. "And what's the truth now?" "That you were never my ending," I said. "You were just the silence before the music." He looked down, the wind ruffling his perfect hair. For once, he didn't try to defend himself. The absence of his arrogance felt almost holy. "I lost everything that mattered," he whispered. "Maybe it's time to find something real." "Maybe it's time to stop searching for what you threw away," I said. "You had love and mistook it for weakness. Now you have success and mistake it for love." He looked at me, eyes glassy but proud. "Is this what you wanted? To watch me fall?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I wanted you to see what standing looks like." The first drops of rain began to fall, Soft, apologetic. He didn't move. Neither did I. "Lyra," he said, almost breaking, "do you ever miss me?" I smiled sadly. "I miss the woman I was when I believed you." He closed his eyes, breathing like someone trying to inhale the past. When he opened them again, I saw it, the collapse. Not loud, not theatrical. Just the quiet sinking of a man realizing he was no longer the main character. He tried to speak, but his words drowned in the wind, so I filled the silence. "You said I'd never be anything," I reminded him. "And I believed you, for a while. But the thing about believing in lies is that eventually they get tired of living inside you." He nodded slowly, tears hidden by rain. "You were always stronger than me," he said. "No," I replied. "I just survived what you couldn't face." Lightning cracked across the sky. He flinched. I didn't. Storms never scared me anymore. They sounded too much like applause. He reached for me one last time. "Lyra, please!" I stepped back. "Don't beg. It doesn't suit you." The words didn't come from cruelty. They came from closure. He lowered his hand, defeated but freer somehow, as if he'd finally stopped pretending. The rain turned heavy, washing everything between us. He took off his watch, gold, cold, perfect, and set it on the railing. "Time doesn't fix things," he said. "It only reveals what we broke." I touched the bracelet on my wrist, the same one that had started and ended it all. Then maybe this is time's way of forgiving us. He smiled, small, real, human, then turned and walked away. I stayed until the storm softened. The ocean roared, but I felt calm, as if the entire island had exhaled with me. I looked down at the watch he'd left behind. The hands had stopped, fitting. I picked it up, turned it once in my palm, and let it fall into the sea. It disappeared with barely a splash. Some endings don't need sound. That night I wrote a single line in my journal. Forgiveness doesn't rebuild bridges. It builds peace. And as I closed the book, I realized that his undoing wasn't punishment. It was balance. He once said I'd never be anything. Now he was the one learning how to be nothing. He came to me at sunset. No entourage, no mask, no pride left to wear. The sky burned gold over the island, the kind of beauty that only happens before darkness. I knew that hour. It was the same one when he left me years ago. Maybe fate was offering him a mirror. He stood at the entrance of my villa, hands trembling slightly, rain still glistening on his sleeves. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Storms have no boundaries," I said. He stepped inside. The silence stretched between us, thick as perfume, fragile as glass. He looked around. The art, the marble, the calm. "This place," he whispered. "It feels like you." "It is me," I replied, "every inch of it." He nodded, as if realizing that everything he ever dismissed had built something too vast to comprehend. Then he spoke the words I never thought I'd hear. "I need to tell you the truth." I didn't stop him. I just listened, the way you listen to thunder from a safe distance. "I didn't leave because of money," he began. "I left because you scared me." He paced slowly, eyes on the floor. "You had vision, fire. You saw beauty where others saw nothing. And I only knew how to own things, not admire them." He looked up, voice shaking. "You were the light, and I didn't know how to stand beside it without disappearing. I didn't move, didn't breathe." The words fell like rain after drought, too late, too soft, too pure to change anything. "I thought if I made you feel small," he continued, "you'd stay. Because if you ever saw who you truly were, I knew you'd leave me." A bitter laugh slipped from his lips. "And you did. Not when I wanted, not how I feared. But you did." I closed my eyes for a moment. Pain didn't surge this time, only clarity. The kind that cuts deeper because it's quiet. "You broke me to keep me," I whispered. He nodded, ashamed. "And when I couldn't keep you broken," he said, "I built a life pretending I didn't care." The confession hovered between us like smoke, and suddenly I understood. His cruelty was cowardice in costume. He looked at me, desperate, raw. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just needed you to know the truth." I smiled gently. "The truth doesn't erase the past," I said. "It only lights the scar." He swallowed hard. "I don't want anything from you." "Good," I whispered, "because there's nothing left to give." He took a shaky breath. "Do you ever think of what we could have been?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I remember who I became instead." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the bracelet on my wrist. "That piece," he said softly. "It used to mean love." "It still does," I replied. "Just not yours." We stood there for a long while, two people bound by history, freed by truth. He looked at me like he was memorizing the last chapter of a book he once owned but never read. "You were right," he whispered finally. "About what?" "Silence is powerful." I smiled faintly. "It always was. You just never listened." He turned toward the door, then stopped, one hand resting on the frame. "You know," he said, "I thought I came here for closure. But now I see. I came here to say goodbye properly." I tilted my head. "Then do it." He faced me one last time, eyes tired, voice steady. "Goodbye, Lyra." "Goodbye, illusion," I whispered back. After he left, the villa felt larger, lighter, somehow. I walked to the balcony and watched him disappear down the path. Each step he took erased a ghost. When the door finally closed behind him, I let the silence flood in. Not empty, sacred. The kind that hums when a story ends. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the horizon turned crimson, as if the universe was burning the old script. I thought about everything he said, the fear, the confession, the fragility. For years I dreamed of this moment, believing it would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like peace wearing exhaustion's perfume. That night I didn't dream of him. For the first time in years, my sleep was quiet. No echoes, no ache. In the morning, the island was bright again. The sea looked gentler, as if it too had forgiven something. I walked to the shoreline, the waves kissing my feet, and whispered into the wind. "You were never the ending. You were the beginning of my becoming." The tide rose and carried the words away, perhaps to him, perhaps to the past. It didn't matter. I turned back toward the villa, sunlight glinting off the diamond bracelet. Its light danced across the sand like a promise fulfilled. The woman who once begged to be seen had finally learned the art of disappearing, not into pain, but into peace. Morning light slipped through sheer curtains, painting silver veins across the marble floor. The villa was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows truth, not absence, resolution. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the night before. Not pain, not regret, just the soft ache of release. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. The sea hummed like a lullaby that had finally found its end. I walked barefoot to the mirror. The woman staring back looked familiar, but not the same. Once I would have searched that reflection for approval. Now, I searched only for peace. The gown from the gala still hung over a chair, a memory of victory. But my eyes lingered instead on the robe I wore. Simple, white, soft. Freedom doesn't need sequins. For years, the mirror had been my judge. It had reflected weakness, desperation, ambition. Now it reflected calm. And calm is the most beautiful form of power. I studied the lines near my eyes, evidence of living. The softness of my mouth, evidence of forgiving. And the steadiness of my gaze, evidence of knowing. No makeup, no armor, just me, whole, raw, luminous. I whispered to my reflection, "You survived him." But then I smiled and corrected myself. No, You transcended him. The bracelet caught the morning sun. Its diamonds sparkled against my wrist, throwing tiny stars across the walls. Once, that light had been a reminder of what hurt. Now, it was proof of what healed. I traced its curve with my fingertips and closed my eyes. Behind them, I saw flashes. The cafe where I worked, the night I melted the gold, the first design sketch drawn through tears. All of it had led here. Every fall, every rise. Downstairs, Adrian was waiting. He'd flown in that morning. He smiled when he saw me descend the staircase. "I heard he left," he said. "He did," I replied. And so did the part of me that needed him. Adrian nodded, something like admiration flickering behind his calm. "You seem different." "I am," I said. "Pain has an expiration date. Mine finally passed." We walked out to the terrace overlooking the sea. Waves whispered against the shore like applause. He looked at me. "What will you do now?" I exhaled softly. "Live, but quieter this time." He smiled. "You've built an empire out of silence. Maybe it's time to let silence rest." After he left, I returned to the studio inside the villa. Sketches lined the walls, some new, some ancient ghosts. I sat at the table and pulled a blank page. For years, every design had been an echo of something lost. Now, I wanted to draw something born of peace. My pencil hesitated, then moved, soft, sure, free. I drew a shape unlike anything I'd made before. A heart, not broken or hidden, but whole, faceted, luminous, strong. I titled it The Mirror Collection. As I worked, I remembered the words he once said. "You'll never be anything." They no longer burned, they inspired. Because becoming everything was never about wealth or revenge. It was about being at ease inside my own skin. I looked around the studio. The light, the stillness, the scent of melted gold. All of it, mine. Not because I conquered, but because I healed. Later that afternoon, I returned to the mirror once more. Sunlight had shifted, casting a halo of warmth around my reflection. I stood there for a long time. No crown, no diamonds, no facade. Just Lyra. I whispered softly, "Do you recognize her?" The reflection smiled back. "Yes," it seemed to say. "She was always here. You just needed to stop chasing ghosts to see her." That evening I poured wine and sat by the balcony again. The horizon blazed with gold, the same hue as my first sketches, the color of hope disguised as fire. For the first time, I didn't need to look back. The past wasn't a wound anymore. It was texture, part of the design. The world below kept spinning. Press, fame, whispers, stories. But up here silence reigned. And I belonged to it. Willingly, lovingly. I watched the sea turn darker as the stars woke. Each wave looked like a memory dissolving into light. I raised my glass toward the sky. "To the girl who thought she wasn't enough," I whispered. "To the woman who no longer needs to prove she is." The wind carried the toast away. Maybe to him, maybe to the version of me I buried years ago. It didn't matter. They both served their purpose. Before I went to bed, I returned to the work table one last time. The design I'd drawn that morning, the mirror collection, lay complete. I placed the bracelet beside it, the old and the new, the scar and the light, finally side by side. For the first time, they looked identical. Morning unfolded like silk, soft, slow, golden. The island had never looked so still. The storm was gone. Only sunlight remained, spilling across marble and memory. I stood on the balcony wrapped in white linen, the sea stretching endlessly before me, vast, calm, forgiving. The same sea that once witnessed my heartbreak now mirrored my serenity. He said I'd never be anything. But peace made me priceless. Down below, the staff prepared for my departure. Boxes, sketches, suitcases, the remnants of a story complete. I walked through the villa one last time, tracing my fingers across walls that had heard every whisper, every confession. The air was lighter now, as if even the ghosts had decided to rest. On the table by the window, the bracelet waited, the same one reborn from ashes. It caught the morning light and threw it across the room in quiet celebration. I picked it up, feeling its weight, a reminder, a relic, a revolution. For years, it symbolized pain, then revenge. Now, simply truth. I slipped it on my wrist and smiled, not as armor, but as art. Before leaving, I stopped by the mirror one final time. The woman looking back at me no longer needed closure. Her eyes didn't ask questions. They answered them. I whispered to her, "You did it." She smiled softly, but not with pride, with gratitude. Outside, the car waited. The chauffeur held the door open as I stepped into sunlight. The road down from the villa wound along the cliffs, the same path I once took with tears in my eyes, when love had just died. Now I rode it again, same road, different heart. The ocean glimmered below, each wave like applause from the universe. At the pier, Adrian stood waiting. "Leaving already?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "The island has given me everything it owed." He smiled, glancing at the bracelet. "So it's over?" "Nothing ends," I replied. "It just transforms." He nodded, understanding without words. "You changed everything, Lyra." I looked toward the horizon. "No," I whispered. "I just remembered who I was before the world told me otherwise." As we boarded the jet, I felt the hum of engines beneath my feet. The vibration of forward motion. No past pulling, no ghosts clinging. Through the window, the island shrank into a shimmer of green and gold. I didn't wave goodbye. Goodbyes belong to people who plan to return. I carried the memory instead, like perfume, faint but eternal. High above the clouds, Adrian poured 2 glasses of champagne. "To what do we drink this time?" he asked. "To silence," I said. He smiled. "You and your silence." "It saved me," I whispered. "It still does." We clinked glasses. The sound was soft, almost sacred. I looked out the window again. The sky stretched wide and infinite. Somewhere down there, he was probably standing by the sea, realizing too late that not every woman wants revenge. Some just want peace and know how to find it. The jet dipped slightly, catching the sun at the perfect angle. Light exploded across the cabin. Gold, blinding, divine. For a second it looked like heaven's applause. And I realized something simple, something final. He had been my test, but I was always my own miracle. When we landed, cameras waited, reporters eager, lenses hungry. Questions flew like arrows. "Lyra, what's next? Is the collection inspired by your past? Will there be a memoir?" I smiled, stepping through the noise as if through mist. "Some stories," I said softly, "don't need to be told. They just need to be lived." Flashes erupted, but for the first time I didn't flinch. Light no longer blinded me. It belonged to me. That night, back in my city penthouse, I stood before the window overlooking the skyline. Rain began to fall. Soft, silver, cleansing. I whispered into the glass. He once said I'd never be anything. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't perform, it arrives. But everything I became was everything he feared. On my desk lay a letter I'd written to myself years ago, the one I never sent. I opened it. Inside, only one line. "You are enough." I folded it, slipped it into a small jewelry box, and placed the bracelet beside it. 2 symbols of survival, one written, one worn. The night deepened. City lights shimmered like constellations of possibility. Somewhere far away, the ocean exhaled my old life. I exhaled too, slowly, gratefully. There was no grand finale, no thunder, no applause. Just the quiet victory of knowing I had finally become the woman I once needed. And as the clock struck midnight, I whispered one last truth. To every woman still mending, still believing, still fighting. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of self. Then I turned off the lights and let the silence shine. The night held its breath one last time. Outside, the city whispered, the rain softened, and silence became music again. I looked out at the world, vast, glittering, alive, and I smiled. Because sometimes revenge ends in noise, but healing always ends in quiet. If this story touched something inside you, tell me where you're listening from. Because whispered stories like these belong to every woman who turned pain into power and silence into her own kind of empire.